Before you start this project, please preview the full set of instructions so you know what you'll be doing when you start to build. My name is Jake, and these are my iLamp kit video instructions. My kit includes the materials necessary to turn an Apple G4 iMac into a lamp. The instructions detail how to disassemble the iMac, modify the necessary pieces, and rebuild it into an iLamp. I've simplified this version of my lamp design so that it can be built with common tools and basic handy skills. If your skills and tools are more advanced, feel free to do things differently at your own discretion, but please watch and understand these instructions thoroughly so you know how everything should work together. This is a custom DIY project, and my instructions are meant to be a specific guide, but depending on your skills, available tools, and the condition of your iMac, you may have to do some things differently to get the desired result. If you have any questions or problems when building your lamp, please feel free to email me. I'd be happy to help in any way I can. Be aware that you will be following these instructions at your own risk. I cannot be held responsible for damage or injury occurred while performing the steps described in these instructions. Please be sure to follow all safety instructions on your tools and wear eye protection and gloves when necessary. Now let's take a look at some of the tools that you're going to need to disassemble the iMac, modify the pieces, and reassemble using the kit. The first thing you're going to need to disassemble the iMac is a screwdriver set, such as this one. Specifically, you're going to need Torx 10, 8, and 6, a Phillips head bit, and a hex 5, and a flathead bit. I use a power screwdriver just to speed things up a little bit. You're also going to want a wiring tool, but a simple side cutter and a pliers will work just as well. You'll also need a hot glue gun with a couple sticks of glue, and you'll need a Dremel or some sort of rotary carving tool. With the Dremel, you're going to use some heavy-duty cutoff wheels. Usually it takes about 5 or 10 cutoff wheels to grind away at all the necessary pieces. If you have other more advanced tools, feel free to use them. In the videos I'll show exactly what you need to do to each piece, so if you have other tools that you can use to perform these functions, go ahead and feel free to do so. Now, if you don't mind, I want to jump ahead a little bit and take a look at all of the pieces that you're going to have left over from the iMac once you get it all disassembled. These are the pieces that you're going to want to save, and the rest you can put in a recycle pile. The first piece we're going to have is the base plate, this aluminum base plate, and then as well as the base. After the base, we're going to have the motherboard, followed by the modem port and circuit board. We'll also have the steel ring plate. We have the dome housing cover, the chrome arm, the port grommets, and 5 screws that attach the chrome arm to the ring plate, and 2 screws that hold the motherboard onto the base. So that's pretty much it. Those are the parts that we're going to end up with, and along the way I'll tell you which ones to save and which ones you can recycle. Let's go ahead and get right into it. The first thing you're going to want to do is take your iMac and kind of lay it down on its back. Underneath you're going to see the base plate and 4 screws. Use a small Phillips head screwdriver and remove these 4 screws and take off the base plate. Go ahead and put that base plate in your save pile, and going back to the base, you're going to find 4 more larger Torx screws. You're going to use a Torx 10 bit to remove these 4 screws and pull the base plate away from the housing. I'm going to go ahead and use a power drill to speed up the process a little. Go ahead and cut any attached wires that are holding the base to the housing. Once you have the base off, we're going to remove the motherboard from the base. You'll find 1 plastic screw, usually a Phillips head. Go ahead and use your Phillips head screwdriver to remove that screw. There will also be 3 Torx screws that you'll have to remove. Use a T10 bit, T standing for Torx, to remove these 3 Torx screws. Save 2 of them, we're going to reuse them later. Now using a Torx 8 bit, you're going to remove the rest of the small screws holding this little circuit board on, as well as the circuit board on the modem port. Go ahead and remove these 2 screws and the circuit board and put that in your recycle pile. Then remove the 2 screws holding the modem port on. You can recycle the screws, but keep the modem port and its circuit board, as we'll reuse that part later. With those screws removed, you can then pull out the motherboard. On the back of the motherboard, there will be 2 plastic grommets that you're going to want to take off and put in your save pile. Once the motherboard's out, set it to the side into your save pile. Moving along to the base, go ahead and remove the black plastic liner inside of it and discard it. Again, you can use a Torx 8 bit to remove the screws from these aluminum pieces as well as the power supply. When you pull the power supply out, there will be another white plastic grommet behind it that you're going to want to put in your save pile. Put the power supply in the recycle pile. Then you can use a flathead screwdriver to just remove those extra aluminum pieces from the base. Now that the base is cleaned up, go ahead and put it in your save pile. Looking back at the housing of the iMac, we can see about 13 or 14 screws that are visible right now. Basically, we're going to want to take out all of these screws and remove the hard drive, the CD drive, and all the electrical components inside of this housing. So go ahead and use your Torx 10 bit and your screwdriver or your drill, and just pull out any screws that you can see from here on out until we get this housing completely stripped out. I usually start in one spot and just work my way around so that I know I get all of them out. And once you don't see any more screws, you should be able to just yank the hard drive right out of the housing. Go ahead and use your snips to snip any wires that are still connecting it and pull it out and put it in your recycle pile. We won't use that anymore. With the hard drive and CD drive out of there, we've uncovered a couple more screws. There's 2 screws hiding underneath the CD drive tray cover, and there's 2 more located toward the back. Go ahead and use your Torx 10 bit to remove those as well. You may need a bit extension to reach some of them, or just a regular screwdriver. With the screws removed, you can go ahead and remove the drive's tray cover. Looking back in toward the top of the housing, we can see a fan, another circuit board, and some other miscellaneous wires. We're still going to use our Torx 10 bit to remove all these screws and go ahead and pull all that stuff out of there. All of this stuff you can put in the recycle pile. We won't be using any of it. Use a wire cutter to cut any attached wires that hold the fan into the housing. With a flat blade screwdriver, you're going to want to pry up these plastic protective pieces because there's a couple of screws underneath them that we're going to have to take out. So just slide your blade, your screwdriver, underneath and pry them out. Then you can use a Torx 8 bit to remove the screws underneath. There should be 1 on the bottom and 2 on the top. Now we're down to the last 5 screws inside of the housing. These 5 screws hold the chrome arm onto the ring plate, which is attached to the housing. We're going to go ahead and remove these 5 screws and put them in your save pile because we're going to use those screws to hold the arm onto the base plate. Using Torx 8-bit, go ahead and remove these screws and put them in your save pile. With the screws removed, you can go ahead and trim any excess wires and pull the chrome arm out of the housing and the ring plate. Flipping the housing over, we can then pull off the housing cover and then pull off the steel ring plate. There's going to be a little bit of plastic around this ring plate that we'll pull off and put in the recycle pile because we won't need that, but we're going to want to keep this ring plate because we'll modify it later to hold the arm onto our base. You can also go ahead and recycle the steel housing because we won't be using it. Now moving along to the LCD screen, there's going to be a number of screws around the top and the bottom and the sides of your LCD screen. The 15-inch models have screws on all 4 sides, and I believe the 17-inch models only have screws along the bottom. You're going to use a hex 5-bit to remove these screws, but I have seen iMacs that these screws have been a Phillips head bit, so depending on your iMac, you'll need a different bit, but the main thing is that you just remove all the screws so that we can open this up. You can put these screws in your recycle pile because we won't be using them. Once all the screws are removed, you can pop it open a little bit and open up the front from the back of the LCD screen. You'll see a few wires attaching the front to the back, and go ahead and use your snips to just snip the wires. Put the actual display in your recycle pile. We won't be using that piece anymore. When we flip it over to the back side of the display casing, we're going to find a couple of wires and a couple of screws. Go ahead and snip the wires and then use a Torx 8-bit to remove these 3 screws. Once those screws are removed, we can pop off the cap and uncover 4 more screws, which we'll remove as well. We can put these screws in the recycle pile. With the screws removed and the wires cut, we can then remove the back part of the casing from the arm. Put the back part of the casing in your recycle pile, and we're left with the chrome display arm. So let's go over one more time the pieces that we've actually set aside to use for the eye lamp. First of all, we have the housing cover, which is going to be the shade of the lamp. We have the chrome arm, which is going to be the arm for the lamp. We have the base, which is going to be the base for the lamp, and the base plate, this aluminum base plate with the Apple logo on it. Attached to the base is going to be these 2 white grommets for the ports, and the one square that the power cord is going to come out of. We have this steel ring plate, which we're going to modify so that we can use it to attach the chrome arm to the base. We have the modem port and circuit board, and we also have the motherboard. Looking at the screws, we have the 5 screws right here that are going to attach the chrome arm to the ring plate, and then we have 2 Torx screws that are going to attach the motherboard to the base. You also notice that I have this little circuit board laying out. We may or may not use this. It kind of depends on what you want to do. There's a heat sink on the motherboard that we could use instead of this to kind of cover up some wires. So go ahead and keep it for now, and you can decide later if you want to use it or not. Now that we have our iMac disassembled and all the pieces set aside, let's get to the fun part, which is kind of modifying the pieces and making them into a lamp. First thing we're going to need is a rotary carving tool or a Dremel or any kind of model of this, just basically something that you can grind some metal with. So if you have a table grinder or a bench grinder, that'll work too, but we're going to need a little rotary carving tool with a cutoff wheel to grind away at this steel ring plate. As you can see here, I'm going to use a Dremel heavy duty cutoff wheel, part number 420, and that usually works pretty good to grind away at these little pieces. So let's start out with the ring plate, and what we're going to want to do is fasten this down. You can clamp it down with a couple of clamps, but I like to secure it to a board just using a couple of screws. Once it's secure, take your carving tool and your cutoff wheel and just go ahead and on this inside ring of circles, you're just going to want to cut those so that we can remove the inner part of this steel ring. Basically, we're going to want to make this look like this. So with safety glasses and safety gloves on, just start carving away at these. You're going to want to be careful because the cutoff wheel will throw some sparks and it'll probably heat up the metal a little bit. The edges will also be sharp, so when you touch it, just be kind of careful. So there it is. That's what we want. Just some nice even cuts all the way around. Actually, they don't even have to look that good because this piece is going to be hidden and never seen again, but that's just kind of the easiest way to cut it out of the rest of the ring plate. So now what we're going to want to do is kind of shave off the top part of this little washer. We'll call it a washer that we've made now. You can see the 2 holes that are close together on the top here. There's 2 little pins that go in these holes, and then the 5 screws go in the other larger holes. So where the 2 holes are closest together on the top of that, we're going to call that the top, and we're just going to want to shave off the top using our Dremel again, or if you have a larger table grinder or a larger grinder, you can use that as well. But in this case, we're just going to carve those off using the same cutting wheel. Again, you can clamp it down or put it in a vise. I usually just use 2 screws and screw them to a board to secure it. Now, once again, you're going to want to make sure you carve off the top here where the 2 holes are closest together. Again, you're going to want to make sure you're carving off the right part. There'll be the 5 larger holes, and then next to 2 of the large holes, there'll be 2 smaller holes. This is where 2 pins go in on the chrome arm. So make that your top and just kind of carve all this stuff off there and smooth it out. This smoothed out part is going to sit inside of the base, so without this being smooth, it won't fit very well. So that's basically what we're trying to do here, is get a nice smooth fit so that this can sit inside of the base without these little barbs being in the way. You'll notice I'm not wearing safety gloves in the picture. You'll probably want to use safety gloves because this will heat up the metal quite a bit. It will get pretty hot when you're doing this, and you'll also want to wear safety glasses as well. Also because notice all the sparks that are flying around. Those are burning hot little pieces of metal, and you don't want those in your eyes. So safety gloves and safety goggles for this part. The main point here is just to get this nice and smooth across this top so that that part fits inside of the base later. If you don't get it perfect right now, we can always take it back later and smooth it out a little bit more if it doesn't fit that good, but just get it smoothed down right to the top part of this outside ring for now. As you can see right here, I'm pretty much down to the last part of my cutoff wheel, so for the next step I'm going to have to put in a new one. But this is what we end up with. This washer is now going to have a nice kind of smooth curved top right along the inside part of that ring. Next, let's modify the chrome arm. The first thing we're going to do is grind off these little pins on the top part of the arm, the top being the part that angles out from the rest of the arm, not the part that goes straight down. The part that goes up and angles out, you'll find 2 pins at the top that we're going to want to grind off. So go ahead and locate those pins, and again, use your cutoff wheels and just kind of grind away at those until they're nice and smooth. We're going to have a fitting that goes over the top of these later, so we want to get them nice and smooth and basically make them go away. So use your grinding wheel and just go ahead and grind them away until they're nice and smooth. It doesn't have to look pretty. This part gets covered up by one of the chrome washers later, so whatever you got to do to just get them nice and smooth, just kind of make them disappear. Now let's take a look at the rest of the chrome arm. You'll notice at the top and the bottom of the shaft there's 4 of these little circle things with 3 holes in them, 2 on each side. What those are is a nut and a bolt, basically, and we have to take those out so we can split that casing in 2 to remove the wires and reinstall our new power wire. This normally takes a specialty tool, which I don't have, and normally you guys don't have, but I did find a way that I can give you guys this tool so you can take this apart. What I've included in the kit is a little teeny fork, and you're going to use that fork as your specialty tool to remove these screws. So what I want you to do is take that fork and just kind of bend a little kink into the middle prong, and with that kink bent in there, you should be able to insert the 3 prongs of that fork into this little nut and bolt assembly here, and loosen those and take them off, and then we can use the fork again to put them back in later. So with your fork, just bend it, as you can see in my picture here. Just kind of kink one end and bend it out. Usually the middle prong is the one I bend out and kink the end of, so that it fits in these little slots. Then with your thumb on the back of one of them, you can use your fork to loosen the other one on the other side. Once you get it turned a couple of times, you can turn it the rest of the way by hand with your fingers. Go ahead and do this for the top and for the bottom. When you're taking them apart, you want to make sure to hang on to it so it doesn't come apart. There's a spring on the inside, and if the spring kind of has a little bit of tension on it, and if it kind of pops, it'll come apart a little bit, and it's a little bit harder to get back together. It's not a big deal, but usually it's just easier if it doesn't kind of pop apart on you. And if it happens, you'll know what I mean. It'll just take a little bit more to get back together, but sometimes it happens, sometimes it doesn't. You're going to want to lay it down on the table, and with the straight end facing to your left and the angle end facing to your right away from you, you're going to want to use a flathead screwdriver and just kind of pry up on that top part of the casing. Once it pops up, remove the whole thing and lay it down. You're going to notice 2 black plastic spacer pieces here that sometimes those try and fall out. Just kind of keep an eye on those, make sure you don't lose them, because we're going to put those back in together. Once we get this part of the casing off, we're going to go ahead and just snip these wires right in the middle. That'll make them easier to take out, and then just pull the wires out the right end, and I'm going to snip them here closer to the left end and make those easier to pull out, and then just one at a time pull those wires out until all of them are gone. Now here you can kind of see what happens. Like I was saying, if this thing kind of flies apart on you, the bottom part kind of comes out of the casing, and the top part kind of does too. It doesn't fly completely apart, but the little hinges kind of come apart right there, but it's not really a big deal. We'll just use like a Phillips head screwdriver or a large nail or something like that to kind of pry that bottom part of the joint back into place. So if you lay it on a solid surface and pressing down with one hand on the part of the casing and prying in with a Phillips head screwdriver or something like that, you can pop that joint back together and give a good smack, and it should go right into place. And then you may just have to hold it as you flip it over and put the top part of the case on. But you'll just need to hold it together as you flip it back over so we can insert that wire. So let's go ahead and stick the wire through here. I usually like to put a little bit of kink in the end of the wire. It makes it kind of easier to thread through the holes. So starting at the angly end of this arm, you're going to want to poke the wire in through the hole at the top, and just use a tweezers or a toothpick or a little stick or something like that to kind of help fish it out of the bottom there. So poke it all the way through until it comes out of that hole right there, and pull it all the way through there, leaving about 2 inches of wire still sticking out the end. Now we're just going to thread it back through the bottom part of the arm. So again, with a little bit of kink in the wire, just poke it through this hole right here and pull it right out the bottom part of the arm. So now if you made sure that the joints of the casing and the joints are still in place, let's go ahead and put the top part of this casing back on. Make sure your little black pieces kind of stay in place, and the little green washers are still in place, and put some pressure down onto the casing. And again, you can use a Phillips head screwdriver or maybe a large nail or just something solid and pointy, and just kind of stick it in there and pry it back together till those joints line up and the pins fall back into place. Again, just give it a little crank on each end just to make sure it feels like it's working well for you. It may take a little bit of prying and wiggling and jiggling and maybe some cussing here and there, but eventually it'll snap back together for you and you can go ahead and put the bolts back in. I usually hold it firmly right in the middle and then place the washer into place and put the nut right on top of the washer, and then I use my thumb to hold that down, and then I flip it over and stick the bolt in the other end with the washer and then the bolt through that, and then put it back together thumb tight, and then use the fork specialty tool to twist it together and tighten it down nice and snug. So you're going to have the nut end and the washer, and then on the other side you'll have another washer and then the bolt. So here you can see the bolt going through with the washer in place, and on the other side here goes the washer and then the nut on the top. Holding the bolt from underneath, we can then just tighten this nut thumb tight and then tighten it the rest of the way with our specialty fork tool. Let's take a look at the angly part, which is the top part where the shaft kind of angles off. That's where the bulb's going to attach to, and we're going to make sure that we have about 2 1/4 inches of wire sticking out from the top part of that. So if you don't have 2 1/4 inches, you give it a little yank, pull out a little bit more wire, or if you do, just simply pull from the other end and pull it back. So it's about 2 1/4 inches is what we'll need. So that's the chrome arm. It's finished and ready to go. Next, we're going to modify this USB Apple wall charger. We're going to modify this wall charger so that we can stick female wire connectors on the end of each prong, and then we're going to wire the power to it from there. So again, using your cutoff wheel, we're going to want to cut each one of these prongs approximately in half, maybe just a little bit longer than half, but we're going to definitely want to make them shorter. You can hold your wire connector up there and kind of get an idea. You can maybe mark it with a marker if you want to about how much you're actually going to have to cut off so that that wire connector can slide on all the way to the prong. So with your cutoff wheel, go ahead and cut off about half of it. Do it in short intervals at a time. We don't want to heat up those prongs too much, because if they get too hot, the possibility that they could melt the plastic of that wall charger, and we don't want to mess up anything inside of that charging port. So little short bits at a time. I'm not a very good example in this video because I did it kind of all at once really fast, and you can actually see right there on the top part of that prong I did actually melt the plastic a little bit. I ended up throwing that one away and not using it because I didn't know if I damaged anything inside of the unit or not. Little short bursts at a time won't heat it up too much, and you should be just fine. And I also like to round the edges of those prongs. It makes it a little bit easier to get the wires connectors to fit on there. In this video, I also kind of made the prongs a little bit short. They just look kind of short right there. They can be a little bit longer than that. That's kind of the idea you're going for, just to cut those prongs off so that the wire connectors can fit on there securely and correctly. Now if we pull out our motherboard, we're just going to go ahead and take off this kind of weird shaped metal piece because it's in the way and it doesn't need to be there for anything. I also like to pop off these little white tabs from the RAM slot. Then using a flathead screwdriver, go ahead and pull off this heatsink right here and set that to a side because we may use that for something else later. The same reason I told you maybe keep that little teeny circuit board, because we might use that to cover up some wires. You can use either one of those, whichever one you want. You'll see what I'm talking about in a little bit, so just pull it off and set it aside in your save pile for now. Then using your flathead screwdriver or a chisel or something like that, just kind of tap around on this processor just to kind of peel it off of there. This area is where your USB wall charger is going to go, so we're just kind of going to flatten this out a little bit. So what we're going to do is from this notch here at the top, we're going to measure 2 inches down and 4.5 inches down, and go ahead and use a marker and put 2 little marks right there. Then from the RAM slot, we're going to measure over 2 inches and 3 inches, and again put 2 little lines. Then you can go ahead and square out your lines, outline that rectangle, and we're going to use our cutoff wheel and just kind of cut that rectangle out of that motherboard. As you can see, it's going to make a little bit of dust, so definitely going to want to wear eye protection, and maybe just kind of cover your mouth with your shirt or wear a dust mask or something like that, because it's going to throw a little bit of dust around and you probably don't want to breathe that in. Safety gloves would also be a good idea right now, and as you can see, again, I'm not really wearing any, so don't follow my example, I guess. Go just put some safety gloves on. That way you keep from cutting your fingers or hurting your fingers on anything. I recommend cutting on the inside of the lines and just kind of sneaking up on it. That way you don't make a giant hole right away. I'd rather make a small hole and make it a little bit bigger a couple of times until it fits than making a big hole right away and having it be too big and not being able to make it smaller. It doesn't really matter because we're going to be gluing it in there, and that's just a hole for it to sit in, but I like it to be nice and tight so I can put a nice bead of glue around it, and it kind of looks like it's supposed to be there then. So you can see here it's still a little tight. I'm just going to go ahead and use that cutoff wheel just to kind of grind out my hole a little bit wider until it fits perfectly. So there we go, we got a perfect fit. It just slides through nice and easy. The next thing we're going to want to do is pick off any of these extra little bumply things, transistors, resistors, all that sort of stuff. We're just going to want to knock all those off so that the top of that motherboard right in front of that USB port is going to be nice and smooth, because that's where we're going to plug our USB cable into. So with a screwdriver and a hammer or a little side cutters, just kind of pop all those things off there and make it kind of nice and smooth. So once you get that smoothed off, go ahead and flip it over, and right in between the two hub ports and this little notch area, we're going to want to smooth that area off as well, because there's going to be some screws sticking around in this area right here, and we want that to be kind of nice and smooth so none of those pieces get in the way of anything. So just kind of peel it off and make it nice and smooth in both of these areas. Now before we put this thing together, let's go ahead and clean up this lampshade. If yours is anything like mine, it's going to have kind of stuff stuck on it and grime and dirt and stuff like that on it. You can see here just some kind of scuffs and just regular grime from a 10-year-old computer that's been used a lot. So there's kind of three things I use to clean these shades off with: the OxyClean, Goo Gone, and Windex. The Goo Gone's going to take off your sticky stuff left behind by tape and sticky notes and stuff like that. The Windex is going to kind of cut off some of the grime, but I really like to use the OxyClean because it seems to cut through some of the stains and stuff that get on it and the regular grime from use and get that original white kind of luster back to it. If you have deep scratches and stuff like that, there's really not much you can do. You really don't want to buff it with a high-speed buffer or anything like that, because there's kind of a matte finish on this shade, and if you polish it too much with any buffing compound or a coarse buffing pad or anything like that at a high speed, you're going to remove that matte finish and there'll be a shiny finish underneath. I usually just stick with the Windex and the OxyClean and kind of rub it down by hand. Now you can see on this one I've kind of used the Goo Gone on there to get off those sticky spots and from the tape and stuff like that. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the OxyClean and give it a good rub down to get this grime and stuff off of it that normally doesn't come off with water. I'm going to use kind of a fluffy, coarse dish towel or rag, just kind of a rag or something like that. That way I can kind of get down in the nooks and crannies around the front of that CD drive tray hole and the little holes in the top and everything like that, and go ahead and spray that OxyClean on there, kind of work it in a little bit. Sometimes I let it set for 5 minutes or 10 minutes to kind of let it penetrate the stains a little bit, and then you can pretty much kind of see them wiping away right now. Once it looks clean enough, wash it off with water and you're good to go. There you can see that spot that was really dark when we first started. The OxyClean's pretty much cut that away, and with a little bit of rubbing here I think we can get it almost completely removed. After I get the top done, I like to go ahead and give a squirt on the inside. Usually the inside's just as dirty, if not sometimes dirtier than the outside, so do the same thing with the inside, getting nice and cleaned up, because once you put a light inside there, any dirt that's on the inside is going to shine through to the outside of the shade. So make sure you get the inside of that shade as clean as the outside is. If you got a lot of dirt in those little holes, you can use an old toothbrush to kind of scrub down inside of there, but lots of times just running some water through there will get them cleaned out good enough. I went ahead and washed it off and dry her off with a nice soft cloth, and boom, there you go. If you can rewind and take a look at how dirty it was before and how grimy and kind of gross it was, and now I rotate this all the way around and there's hardly a stain left on it, so got it pretty clean even though it looked pretty ugly before. Now we can do the same thing to this base here too. It's going to have the same kind of grime and scuffs on it, so I'm just going to go ahead and give it a squirt with OxyClean and rub it down the same way that I did the shade until it's nice and clean. Again, you can use an old toothbrush to get down into the little nooks and crannies if you've got dirt stuck down inside of there. Otherwise, just spraying it off with water might do the trick. If you don't have any OxyClean laying around, a lot of people already have some Windex, so maybe just give some Windex a try first to see if it removes the stains good enough. So before you feel like you need to go out and buy some OxyClean, go ahead and give Windex a try and see if it does a good enough job. Now I'm just going to rinse the motherboard off with water. You can see how dirty it is, and once I give it a good rinse and a scrub with the toothbrush, it looks pretty much like new. Now let's take a look at the aluminum base plate cover. A couple things about this base plate cover is that, well, first of all, it used to be the bottom of the G4 iMac, so therefore it's probably got some scuffs and scratches on it and stuff like that. Yours may be in pretty good condition, but a lot of the ones that I get are pretty well scratched up, and I don't like selling scratched up things, so I've developed a way that I can clean those scratches off and basically sand them away, resurface this piece. You can't really buff them out with a buffer or anything like that. What I've done is created a jig that I can put the original spun brushed metal look on it, and then I take it and have a Apple template that I place over the top and sandblast that indented Apple logo, so that way it's got the original spun brushed metal look with the sandblasted Apple logo in the middle. And that does two things: it takes away the scratches from the surface, and it also gets rid of those letterings from the barcode and the letterings all the way around the outside, because I never really liked the way that looks. So that's what I do on the lamps that I build, and I think I'm gonna make this a service to you guys. If you have a base plate that's scratched and scuffed up and doesn't look very good, you can send it to me and I can put the original spun brushed look back onto it and sandblast that Apple logo back in, so it'll remove the scratches and take off all that lettering and stuff like that. Shoot me an email if that's something that you're interested in. If you have a plate cover that's pretty well scratched up and doesn't look very good. If yours does look good, just give it a little shine with some metal polish or something like that, and continue on from here. Now that we've got everything taken apart, cleaned up, and modified, let's get started building. First thing we're going to start with is the base. You're going to take the base and set it on the table in front of you. Now what we're going to do is cut a hole in the base plate and the base plate cover for the chrome arm to sit into. So with the base sitting on the table, make sure that the port hubs are facing away from you. So rotate it around until the port hubs are facing away from you. Then you can go ahead and put your base plate cover onto the base and make sure the top of the apple is also facing away from you. It's very important that you make it look like the video right here, because you don't want to get it mixed around or turned sideways when you start to drill your hole for the chrome arm to sit into. So again, when you put it together, make sure that the top of the apple and the port hubs on the base are facing away from you. Then you can go ahead and align and screw down the 4 screws with a Phillips head screwdriver. This is where the lamp's arm is going to go, right at the top of the ring above the apple. If you flip it over, this is where it'll come through, right on the inside of this ring, right below the port hubs. Basically, we're going to use our cutoff wheel to cut an 1 5/8 hole in the base plate and the base plate cover for this chrome arm to sit into on this hub right here. Make sure you're looking at the straight part of the shaft of the chrome arm and not the part of the shaft that sticks out at about a 45-degree angle. The straight part is the part that's going to attach to the base. You can see the lip right here that's going to sit on the base plate cover, and the rest of this is going to sit down inside and attach to that ring plate. So this is the template that I've included in the kit. You're going to want to lay it over your base exactly as shown. Make sure that the Apple logos line up and that the screw holes line up. You'll see the reference points, one on each side. Simply use your screwdriver or something to poke those holes so you can see through and align those holes with a screw on each side of that aluminum base plate. Once you have those holes exactly lined up, and make sure that the Apple logos are facing the same direction, use a piece of tape to tape it in place. Now notice the big hole at the top of the template. This is the hole that we want to cut in the base. In the perfect world, everybody would have an 1 5/8 hole saw. If you do, feel free to go ahead and use this to drill the hole in your base plate. You'll see the center reference point right there, and you can just chuck that into your drill and slowly drill through the base until you get a hole all the way through. If you don't have an 1 5/8 hole saw, we're going to go ahead and use the Dremel with a cutoff wheel to kind of carve a hole in the base plate and kind of sneak our way all the way out until we get a hole big enough to fit the chrome arm into. So the first thing we're going to do is cut that circle out. So go ahead and use a knife and just cut around the outside of that circle and pull it out of there. Now use a marker or Sharpie or something and trace the inside of that circle. Make sure to hold the paper nice and flat so you get the circle exactly where it needs to be. You can now remove the template from the base. Now we're going to grind that circle all the way through the base so the flange on the chrome arm can sit inside of it. So again, using the cutoff wheel with your Dremel, you're going to want to go ahead and grind out all that metal inside of that circle and just kind of sneak up to the outside of that circle. You can see here I'm just kind of grinding away in a little kind of octagon shape inside of that circle until I get it completely loose and I can pry out the inside of that aluminum base plate. And then once I get it the rest of the way, I'll be able to pry out the bottom part of the base. You want to be careful not to go too far because the flange on the outside of that chrome arm doesn't cover up much more, so if you get outside the lines it may show. So I usually say, you know, take your time, be real careful, and just kind of start in and work your way out. Just kind of plunge down and carve out a hole, and then grind the edges away until you sneak up on it, and test fit it a bunch of times just to make sure you're getting the right fit until it fits perfectly. Cutting little bits at a time and then turning the base, you can work your way around and cut out that circle. Again, for this part you're going to want to wear safety glasses because there will be flying metal debris, safety gloves, and maybe a mask too, just because there's going to be small shavings of metal flying around and you don't want to be breathing any of that stuff in. Now once you get a hole cut out, you can really get in there with your grinding wheel and just kind of work away at the edges of that hole. Nice and slow, there's really no reason to hurry. If you grind on it too hard, you may break your grinding wheel. That line's actually a little bit smaller than what the hole needs to be. I did that way on purpose so no one would get outside the line right away. So you're going to have to take all of that line and then a little bit more before your hub of your arm is going to fit inside of that hole. And then once I get right up to the line, I'm going to be test fitting that arm a bunch of times just to see where I'm going to need to grind off a little bit more, and that way I don't take away too much, and just keep test fitting that arm and grinding a little bit more until it has a nice perfect fit. You'll know when it fits good because the arm will sit right down inside of it, and you'll be able to feel right around the edge. It'll just be nice and flat, and it won't rock back and forth, and that flange will rest nicely on the base. Now find this 1-inch threaded piece of hollow rod. We're going to mark the center of this rod and glue it inside of the chrome arm. We're going to glue this piece into the chrome arm using this JB Quick Weld. The JB Quick Weld is a 50-50 mix, so we're going to squirt out equal portions out of each tube. You don't need a whole lot, maybe a glob about the size of a dime for each of them. Squeeze it out and then mix them together with a little stick until it's equal consistency. You'll want to mix it quickly and thoroughly because it starts to set up in about 4 minutes. Once you get it mixed together, use a little stick and carefully just kind of smear it around half of that rod. You'll want to apply it pretty thick and even over the shaft. Try not to get any on the other side of the line because you don't want to mess up the threads when we go to install the socket. Also, you don't want to get any weld in the hole because that's where our power cord is going to go. Once you have it smeared on thick and even, you can install it in the angled part of the chrome arm. Remember, the straight part of the chrome arm goes in the base and the angled part holds the lamp socket, harp, and shade. So being careful not to get any of the JB weld on anything else, poke the power wire through the hole in the middle of this piece and just kind of squish it right down into the angled part of that chrome arm attachment. Give it a little twist and turn and kind of smear that weld around on the inside and make sure it gets an even coat. You're only going to want to stick it halfway into the hole. Remember, the socket goes on the other half of that threaded area, so halfway into the hole and make sure it gets worked around for an even contact. Go ahead and inspect it, and you're going to want to make sure that it's sticking straight up and down out of that socket. The quick weld will set up within 4 to 6 minutes, but you're going to want to let it cure for about 4 hours or longer. Let's take the white grommets that go on the port hubs and remove the little metal brackets off the back. Next, we're going to snip these 2 longest tabs. Now we can glue the grommets back into their place. Hold them into place and put a little dab of hot glue along each corner. Next, we can glue the centerpiece in as well. With a little dab of glue around the edge of it, snap it into place. Now go ahead and flip it over, and since we got it all cleaned up, we're going to go ahead and put the base plate cover back onto the base. Align the armhole, and then align and tighten the 3 remaining screws with your Phillips head screwdriver. Now we can install the chrome arm. Route the power cord through the hole, and with the straight part of the arm, insert it into the base. We attach the arm to the base using our modified ring plate. You're going to use these 5 screws to mount the ring plate to the arm and sandwich the base plate in between the two. So go ahead and tilt the unit over on its back and grab your ring plate and slide it down over the power cord. You'll find 2 alignment pins on the bottom of the arm. You're going to line those alignment pins up with the holes on the ring plate. Make sure the cupped portion of the ring plate is facing toward the bottom of the base, as shown. Then insert the screws and tighten them down snugly. These screws require a Torx 10 bit. Tighten them up one at a time, working in a star pattern, kind of the same way that you tighten up the lug nuts on a car wheel. It's very important that you make sure that the 2 alignment pins are facing the back of the lamp base. Once it's tight, the arm should be secure and sitting flush against that ring plate. Now let's wire and install the USB wall charger. Place the motherboard in the base and then use your marker to outline the outside of the rectangle that you cut. This will give you a general idea of where the wall charger will mount. Grab the rest of your power cord. Using your wire snips, snip the end of the power cord about an inch or so. Then strip off about a 1/4 inch of insulation from each of the wires. Do the same thing with the cord coming out of the base of the lamp. Split it up the middle about an inch or 2, and then strip off each one of the wires about a 1/4 of an inch. Now route your power cord through the center hole of the hub port. You'll notice these 2 wires are different. There's a smooth wire and a ribbed wire. We're going to wire the 2 smooth wires together into one female wiring plug, and we're going to wire the 2 ribbed wires together. Then the smooth wire is going to go up through the arm and connect to the gold screw set on the socket, while the rib wire will go up and connect to the silver screw set on the socket. Once again, we're going to wire the smooth wires together and the ribbed wires together. Sometimes it's easier to see if you mark them with a marker beforehand. Next, you're going to connect the 2 female wire connectors. Slide the wire connector over the 2 twisted together wires, and then give it a good crimp. It's going to be a tight fit, but with a little bit of wiggling it should go. Do the same thing with the other wire. Once the wires are all the way in, give them a good crimp. Give it a little tug on the wire connectors to make sure they're securely fastened. Now we're going to plug in the USB hub. Either wire can go to either terminal. Polarity at this point doesn't matter. Slide each one of the wire connectors onto a prong from the USB hub. It'll be a tight fit, but we don't want them to come off easily, so with a little bit of wiggling and pushing, they should slide on and stay on snugly. Try and keep any twists and knots out of the wires. Now we can install the motherboard by sliding the power port through the rectangle hole in the motherboard and laying the motherboard flat in place where it should mount. Align the USB ports on the motherboard with their respective holes and flatten the motherboard into place, making sure that the USB wall charger is mounted flat inside the motherboard. Once you get everything lined up, you should be able to install the 2 remaining screws, one here and one here. With the motherboard installed, we can go ahead and glue in the charger. We're going to want to make sure the wide part of the charger is toward the bottom of the base. That way we have as much of the charging port sticking up above the motherboard as possible. Using your hot glue gun, put a big glob of hot glue on the base plate beneath the motherboard. This is what will hold your charger in place. The USB slot on the charger is off-centered. You're going to make sure the wide part of the charger sits down inside of the motherboard and attaches to the glue. Again, making sure the wide part of the charger mounts down inside of the motherboard, stick the charger into the glue. Hold that there for a few seconds for that glue to cool down and harden. Once that's set up, you can put a bead of glue along each side of the charger just to help hold it in place. Now we want to cover up those extra wires. You can either use the heat sink that we pulled off earlier or that small circuit board that we pulled off the motherboard in the first place. Personally, I like to use the heat sink just because I think it looks a little bit better. The only thing that's going to hold this on is a little bit of glue. So put a little bit of glue on the back of your heat sink just to give it some more surface area to stick to, and then put a big glob of glue on each one of the female wire connectors. This is what will hold it into place. Stick the heat sink onto the wire connectors and let the glue cool and cure. Next, we're going to glue in the modem port. In this notch, we can see the power cable coming out through this middle hole. We're just going to push that down into place and make sure it's out of the way. We're going to put a little bit of hot glue around the edges of it to hold it into place. Just a little dab on the top and in each bottom corner, and then one glob of glue on this screw right here, and one glob of glue on the bottom so it rests on that screw. Stick it into place and hold it for a few seconds to cool. I like to put a little extra around the edges here and there just so it holds better. Even if it looks messy on the inside, it still looks good on the outside. Now we're going to assemble and wire the lamp socket, harp, and shade. Look at the top of the chrome arm. If you notice any big globs or extra glumps of JB Weld that have dried, go ahead and use a knife to chisel them off and get that as flat as possible. You'll want it flat because we're going to use one of these plated check rings to cover up that area, and it's got to have a flat surface to sit on. So if it rocks at all or feels bumpy underneath, go ahead and pull it off and carve away any glumps or globs that are left over. You can also use sandpaper or a chisel to do this. Once you have it flat, slide the check ring over the wires and shaft. Now we can put on the lamp harp. Remove the wire part of the harp from the base and slide the base over the wires and shaft against the check ring. Then place the lock washer over the shaft. Next, we're going to unscrew the base from the socket and thread it onto the shaft. First, you'll have to loosen this Phillips head screw. Don't take it out all the way, just loosen it up a little bit so you can thread it onto the shaft. Make sure to keep the tightening ring on the base of the socket when you put it onto the shaft. Thread it on and keep on tightening until everything is snug and secure. You want the base of the lamp harp to be secure so the lampshade doesn't wobble back and forth. Give it a pretty good crank, just as tight as you can get it with your hands. Once you have it nice and snug, go ahead and tighten up that Phillips head screw on the base of the socket. Now if the cardboard insert has fallen out, you can go ahead and reinstall it at this time. Next, we're going to wire up the rest of the socket. So go ahead and push the rest of the socket out of the nickel plated casing, and then remove the cardboard from the rest of the socket. On the socket, you'll find two Phillips head screws. Those are where the wires will connect. Go ahead and back those Phillips head screws out a little bit so you can wrap the wires around them. They won't come out all the way, but just enough for you to get the wires on. Twist each end of the wire around your screwdriver to put a little bit of a curve in it. This will make putting the wires on the connectors easier. At the socket switch, you'll want to make sure to connect the ribbed wire to the white screw and the smooth wire to the gold screw. This will make sure that you're always switching the hot wire coming into the lamp. With the wire wrapping around clockwise, Hook the wire around the screw and tighten it snugly. Once you have the wires snugged up, you can slide the cardboard casing back over the socket. Make sure the cardboard casing covers up all exposed wires. Slide the socket back into the base and then install the socket case. Slide the socket case over the socket. Insert the socket into the base and then bring up the tightening ring and start to thread it on slowly and easily. You don't want to get it cross-threaded. If you do, back it off and try it again. If it doesn't go easily, don't force it because you might mess up the threads. Just realign everything and try and tighten it up again. Once you have the socket snugged up, we're going to trim off the pull chain. I like to count down about 15 balls on the chain and snip it off right there. That's about the correct distance so that the big ball on the bottom doesn't swing back and bang against the lamp arm when you turn the light on and off. Go ahead and snip the chain about 15 balls down and pull the big ball out of the excess chain. Now you want to remove the bottom clasp from the excess portion of the chain. Using your fingernails or a small pliers or tweezers, just disconnect the clasp from the chain. Then slide the big ball back up on the chain on the lamp and reinstall the clasp by clipping it into place. Now you can let the big ball back down, and there you have it. If you give it a gentle swing, it shouldn't swing back and hit the arm at all. Now let's glue the check ring and the washer onto the lampshade. Find the second check ring and lay it face down on your workspace. Place the lampshade over the top of the check ring. Place 2 to 3 drops of glue inside the check ring up onto the lip of the shade. Then quickly turn it over, and while the glue is still malleable, center the check ring inside of the shade. Once the glue is cooled, flip it back over, and you're going to place a full bead of glue along the inside of that check ring up onto the lip of the shade to hold it into place. Slowly go around the inside, making sure to get a good joint between the bottom of the check ring and the inside lip of the shade. Wipe any extra glue off of the top of the lip. Now find the 3 nuts included in the kit. This is an odd use for a nut, but we're just going to use it for a spacer in this situation. Place a drop of glue inside the check ring and then place the nut on the drop of glue. Do this in 3 locations evenly spaced inside of the check ring. My spacing didn't really turn out that even, but you kind of get the idea. Now that the nuts are in place, find the washer that was included in the kit. We're going to put some glue on the inside of this washer just to give it some surface area to stick to. Then we're going to put a drop of glue on the top of each one of the nuts. While it's still hot, place the washer on top of the nuts. I like to give it a little bit of twist just to work it into place. Let that cool and harden. While that's cooling, if you have any extra glue in the middle of the hole, you can wipe it out with an extra bolt or a stick or something like that. Now we can attach the lamp harp to the harp base. Go ahead and squeeze the harp together and snap it into place. I like to use a pliers to pinch the flanges on each side of the harp. That way they slide over the base snugly. Pinch it a little bit at first and slide it over the base. If it doesn't fit tight enough, pinch it a little bit more until it gets a nice snug fit. Now you can go ahead and screw in the bulb. This is a 4-watt 120 lumen neutral white LED bulb. I recommend using LED bulbs because they don't put off a lot of heat. If you use a regular incandescent bulb, the colors are going to be quite a bit different and the bulb's going to be a lot hotter and possibly dangerous to the touch. Straighten out the shaft on the top of the harp and then place the shade on the harp shaft. And for the final step, screw on the polished cap, making sure that the shade is centered. Now you can wipe off any extra fingerprints, plug it in, and give it a try. Well, that's it. You're done. You've finished building your eye lamp, and now you can enjoy it. If you're looking for more information or videos about the eye lamp, you can see them on my website at www.jakeharms.com. There's also a section there for frequently asked questions if you have any questions about your eye lamp. I hope you enjoyed building it, and I'd love it if you